Um, I have known this gentleman for over 20 years now. We're getting old. And we are blessed, to say the least. As we go to the Holy Land, one of the amazing things is this gentleman has done an incredible job of not only unpacking history, and when I say history, modern history, Jewish history, Christian history, biblical history, but what I do love about him is his passion for making sure that there's understanding within everybody that goes on the trips. I don't think I've ever had this, but in every trip that I've taken, I've probably led 150 to 200 people and dragged them through the Holy Land, and yes, we have dragged some through the Holy Land. I don't think we've ever gotten back and had one person say that it wasn't the trip of a lifetime. And I wish I could take credit for that, but I don't, because this man to the right of me is a large part and parcel reason for it. So tonight, we've asked him to come, and he's traveled all the way to the States. He's been traveling and traversing all of the states to be able to come and to meet with us because of our relationship. And he is going to share a couple of different topics. One of the topics is Israel and the history of Israel. And so for those of you that are followers of Jesus, or those of you that are interested in Israeli history and the Jewish people and the Holy Land, I'm really excited for him to be able to share insight within that. That'll be for about the first 40, 45 minutes. Then we're going to open it up for some questions and answers. We'll take a little bit of a break, and then he's going to come back and he's going to share about the current events in Israel today, the current conflict that you see unfolding on American TV, and surely we can trust everything that the TV shows us. But one last housekeeping note before I introduce. I do have to introduce first his better half. And his better half, who keeps him organized, keeps him straight, keeps him on the path. This is his lovely wife, Galit. And so, Galit, we welcome you here tonight. Say hello to everybody. And for those of you within Ocean View, we had 2 trips planned to go to the Holy Land before the conflict arose. And over 50-plus people signed up, ready to go, and we had to obviously cancel those trips. One of the things that Reuven and I have been sharing together is we've been talking and planning dates for the next trip. And our heart is we want to make sure that we go when it's safe, and Reuven is excellent at kind of forecasting that and can let us know. But then we also want to beat all the world back to the Holy Land before it gets so crazy that we can't go for several years because everybody wants to go again. So if you're interested, there are 2 ways for you to let us know that you're interested, because then we will let you know when the next trip is coming. And 2 ways are, there are sign-up sheets that are going around, or as you entered, there is a QR code. If you scan that QR code, you can fill out a questionnaire, and that will give us your information. And as soon as we have dates, which probably will be soon, we will let you know, and we will begin holding interest meetings, information meetings, all the logistics for you to be a part. But you've heard me talk well enough, and I've had him standing here for a long time. But it is an honor, Reuven, to have you here with us. And so without further ado, would you welcome Reuven Zusman?
Okay, thank you, Pastor Terry. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I want to extend thanks for 2 main things. The first thing is that you've taken off the time to come and listen to me. It's a nice turnout, and I'm very pleased with that. I want to thank Pastor Terry for opening up the church and encouraging his church family to come and listen. I know that there's folks from Pastor Todd's church, Thrive. Can you identify yourself by picking up your hand? Thrive people? Okay, nice contingent. And anybody else, you're all welcome. And for that is my first thanks. The second thanks goes to the weather that you've arranged for us here. Galit and I arrived in the States just over 2 weeks ago, and we started off in California, where it was great, but then we came to Denver, and they greeted us, listen to this, with minus 59. it was pretty cold. So what you've done for us with the weather, we much appreciate it. The explanation that I was offering there is that Colorado and Minnesota are not only at rivalry, at adversaries when it comes to sports, Nuggets versus the Timberwolves, but it also seems that they are competing as states. Who gets to say that they the home of the chosen and frozen? Okay? So, with no further ado, let me just dive into our topic here. So, these are obviously not normal times. During normal times, I plan, I carry out all the ground arrangements for tours, and I guide tours in Israel. Ever since the attacks on October 7th, 2023, things are not normal. Tourism is pretty much, incoming tourism has pretty much come to a standstill. And I found myself contemplating, okay, what now? There were two main needs that I figured that I need to try and find other ways to accommodate. The first need was, I love being around people. I love engaging with people. I love sharing with people about my beloved Israel, its past, present, future, culture, current events. It's got so many interesting aspects to it. And the other one was, I got to find a way to generate some income. Frankly, I'm not sure which of the two was the stronger driving force behind putting this together, but it doesn't really matter because, hey, here I am, and I'm thrilled to be here. The work that I've been doing for the last 6 months has me putting together 5 talks. I know that in the church life you speak about series about different topics. This, in a way, is a series, but not identical to the church because they're all separate talks. You don't necessarily have to be present at all 10 meetings, 15 meetings of the series in order to follow. You can be present at each of the talks that I've put together, and you'll be able to follow. The ideas as for what would be the topics that would be of interest were born as a result of ongoing consultation with pastors and sort of reflecting on the days that there were a lot of tours coming to Israel, where I realized that there are a lot of things that we just are not going to have the time. A tour to Israel, a pilgrimage, is not like a recreational visit to Mexico or the Caribbean, or for that matter. It's, as several of my pastor friends have put it over the years, you have come to run where the Lord walked. Okay, that's the nature of the Holy Land trip, and there's a lot of other things that people have interest in, and we usually don't have the time to address it. So I kind of think, okay, there's no tourists coming here. As the adage teaches us, if you can't come to the party, we'll bring the party to you. We'll bring Israel to you and share with you some of the things that we really have less time on the ground. And tonight you've opted to hear 2 topics. The first one is Israel's past, present, and future, and the second one will be current events. In both of them, I will be incorporating some Bible quotes. I just want to make it very clear. I am not your pastor. I am not anybody's pastor for that matter. And when I bring up the Bible, it's not like I want to be teaching about Bible. I just want to show the relevance of the biblical quotes that we will be using in each of these talks to just see how fascinating it is that they are relevant until this day, some of the topics that we'll be addressing. One last request before we get started, and that is that during my talk, I'll be sharing a lot of information, and I know it can be somewhat overwhelming. If there is something that you are not able to follow, and you really need an answer to your question right now, then let's do the following. Please raise your hand, and I'll do my best to accommodate and take the question right now. If it can be helped and you can wait till the end, I'm not restricting the length of time for the Q&A, but that might be restricted, but you'll definitely have a chance to ask questions during that time. Okay? All right, so Israel's past, present, and future. What is this talk going to be dealing with? We are going to learn a little bit about the importance of Israel to the 3 monotheistic religions in the order that they appeared on the stage of history. That would be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We will be talking about some of the achievements in Israel, lesser known facts and challenges that the nation currently faces. We'll summarize, and as we said, we'll open the floor for questions. Arbitrarily, I've decided that the definitions that I would follow of what is past and present and future, basically if I put my hand up now and then I lowered it in the past, right? So, to just give more of a bulk of time, we'll kind of make a separation line. Up until 1948, that's the year that Israel became a state, would be the past, and from then until the time present is the present and future. Alrighty, of course, that's not scientific, but it's what we'll do. I want to start by sharing the map of Israel and some numbers that you can learn. This is the southern tip of Israel. Can everybody see the dot as I bounce it a little bit? That's the bottom part, the Gulf of Eilat, all the way up to the north. We're talking about just over 300 miles. Across at the widest spot, the point where Israel sea and land borders with Egypt meet. This is the famous Gaza Strip that's made a lot of problems in recent years. And across at the widest spot, just south of the Gaza Strip to the Dead Sea, you're talking about 80 miles. I want to draw your attention to the statistic at the very bottom here. Israel fits into the US 445 plus times, right? So we're about the size of New Jersey, half the size of Lake Michigan. Those are comparisons for you. The reason that I'm showing you this map is also to point out something else. So yes, we're going to talk about the religions and their connection to this place. But they came a little later. We, mankind, have been around for an unknown length of time, but what we do know is that there were transitions in the way that we live. And what do I mean by that? We today are what we call permanent dwellers. We live in one place, and we may travel for business, for pleasure, but we'll always go back to the place that we call home. In the ancient world, people used to move around a lot more. They would look for places where they can find water, grazing areas for their animals, and that's where they lived. So it wasn't unheard of that people moved places 5-6 times a year, if not even more. So the question that I want to raise is, all right, so what I'm about to tell you is that Israel has always been inhabited. And it's way before it became a cradle of importance to the three monotheistic religions. My question is, why? What would a place like Israel have going for it? And I'll make that even more difficult by telling you that this landmass that I've just shown, 60% of it, by definition, is desert. Who would want to live in a desert area? Well, it may have some other things going for it. It may have some gold or diamonds or other things that are worthy of having. Oil? No. I'll tell you in a moment how we got to the only place in the Middle East that has no oil. But we'll get to that in a moment. The reason that Israel is so desirable from such an earlier stage in history is the fact that it has what you would call the 3 L's that stand for advantages that the land of Israel has. Any idea what they might be? I'm sure that if I give you the first one, you'll be able to give me the second and third. Right? The first one is location. What's the second? Location. What's the third? Location. All right. You guys are good. Yes, Israel is the land bridge between 2 important centers of the ancient world. We'll see that on the map in a moment. Egypt to the southwest, Mesopotamia to the northeast. And unlike today, when many of the prophecies of Isaiah, for example, have come true, in Isaiah 41, 18-20, we read, I will open rivers in the high places and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water and the dry land springs of water, and so on and so forth. Prophecies that we find in the Bible have come true in modern time Israel, and that's part of the attractivity. Now, going back, I promised you a moment ago that I would share with you why it is that we, the Jewish people, ended up in the only place that doesn't have oil. So, a little bit of Jewish people's history that I'm sure you're aware of. The Jews were enslaved in Egypt, and at some point the Lord decided it's time for them to leave, and he struck the Egyptians with the 10 plagues, at the end of which Pharaoh let them go. Who led the children of Israel? Moses. And of what gender is Moses? And what are we males, guys? Forgive me. Notorious for not asking for? Here you go. So Moses is trying to get to Canada. Not a bad place. But the Bible tells us something about Moses, that he stuttered. In Exodus 4:10, it reads, "O Lord, I am not very good with words. I never have been, and I am not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled." So try and imagine the scene. Moses does overcome his male gender-related deficiency of not asking for directions. He stops a bypasser and asks for directions, or at least he tries to, because this is what it comes out like. How do I get to... And the guy's trying to be nice and help him out, and he says, Canaan. You want to get to Canaan, which is the biblical name of Israel. And he points him out in the direction of Canaan. That's how we end up getting to Israel, the only place in the Middle East where there's no oil. But that's, of course, an urban legend, but it's cute. As we said, the Way of the Sea is a famous trade route. This is the way to Egypt, right over here, and along the shores of the Mediterranean. This would go to Capernaum on the southwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. From there, it would cross over to Mesopotamia. That is what I was sharing with you, that Israel is a land bridge between civilizations with access to other known parts of the ancient world by sea. So that's a little general background. And as we said earlier on, we'll be covering each of the monotheistic religions in accordance with the order that they appeared on the stage of history, and the first ones to appear were the Jewish people. The Jewish people come here. This is the promised land, the place where the fulfillment of the covenant is supposed to happen between Abraham and the Lord. We're going to learn about the origins of the name. We'll go through a little bit of the Jewish people's history, and we'll talk about some of the traditions that have been related to Israel wherever Jews are in the world that are still practiced today. The first significant mentioning in the Bible is from Genesis 22, verses 9 to 18. This is where Abraham passes the test. If you remember, he was put to the test by the Lord. Would he be willing to sacrifice his one and only son, Isaac? And when he passes the test, he's promised the land and what will happen with his descendants. There are different definitions as for what are the exact boundaries. Ezekiel gives boundaries. So does Jeremiah, and in other places you'll find descriptions of the boundaries of the promised land. But I'm going to read from Genesis. "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So that's from Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. You know, there's endless quotes that show the covenant, the promised land, its boundaries, and that's perhaps the first time. What I want to draw your attention to is this little formation over here. So this is the River Jordan, and over here, this is what we call today Transjordan, or the Kingdom of Jordan. Later on, we'll be talking about some of the things that have to do with current events, how that was supposed to be a part of the land that was meant to be the Jewish homeland after the end of World War II. Israel today is called Israel, and again, it's of biblical origins. From Genesis 32, the whole story is in 23 to 20. I just cut to the important parts. The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." So the name Israel is divided, as you can see. Isra in Hebrew means rules, judges, struggles, helped, inspired. El is God. So God inspired, God helped, and that is the victory of Jacob as he struggled with the angel. We all remember that story from Genesis. That covenant between Abraham and later on Jacob is signed and manifested through the building of two temples. This one shows the first temple. It was built by King Solomon, roughly 960 BC. And the one on the left is the expanded temple that was built by King Herod. Now, I want to just take a moment to explain that. So the first temple functions from when it's built in 960 BC until it's destroyed by the Babylonians. The Babylonians, who destroyed the first temple, and later on the Romans, who destroyed the second temple, did another thing. They couldn't get over how much importance and centrality is referred by the Jewish people to this one temple, and how it draws hundreds of thousands to go there on three occasions: the pilgrim feasts of the Jews, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. So they took a measure of precaution, so that the Jews don't even, so to say, think about rebuilding the temple. The Babylonians in 586 sent them into exile. But here's what happens. The ancient world knew a lot of changes of power. And 70 years later, we have a new player on the ground. His name is Cyrus. He's the king of Persia. Sometimes we call him Cyrus the Virus. No, we don't. We don't really. But Cyrus is actually a very enlightened individual. And he says to the Jews, you know what? You have my blessing. You can go back to Jerusalem, to the land of Israel, and you can rebuild the temple. Now, you would have thought that everybody would be rejoicing and happy and jumping on this opportunity. If he would have done it moments after they arrived in the Babylonian exile, he may have had a broader response. But guess what? 70 years had gone by. Technically speaking, the people had made themselves a nice life by the rivers of Babylon, and therefore they were not interested, or the majority of them were not interested. Don't forget, the generation that left Israel 70 years earlier was almost entirely gone, and the youngsters, what did they know? So not that many went. They were led by Ezra the scribe, Nehemiah the minister, and by 515 they built the second temple. That second temple is later expanded by King Herod, as we can see here, making it large enough to accommodate something like 300,000 people on the platform around it. The frame that I started off the talk about the Jewish connection to this land would have been the western wall, the remnants of the retaining compound that helped elevate and even out the topography adjacent to the Temple Mount. Unfortunately, this renovated temple is again destroyed by the Romans in AD 70, and until this day we don't have a third temple. I will share up front that there are groups in Jerusalem that are very busy making the preparations and trying to read all sorts of signals and symbols and signs that it's time. But for the time being, what is there at this time are the two Muslim mosques. The destruction of the temple is a traumatic thing, and the exile from the land is also pretty traumatic, but we find ways to kind of make up for that. In Psalms 137, 4-6, we read, "How can we sing a song of the Lord in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand cease to function. Okay, back on? Yeah. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not exalt Jerusalem at my greatest joy." Now, what do we see here? I don't know if you've ever been to a Jewish wedding, but one of the climax moments is when the groom is asked to recite those verses and then break a glass as a reminder of the destroyed temple, that even at the moment of highest joy, the moment that he's getting married, he doesn't forget Jerusalem. And he, by doing so, reminds us all that Jerusalem is destroyed and the temple is destroyed, and Jerusalem less so, but the temple is still not there, and we're hoping to see it come back one of these days. One last thing I want to show you two last things that relates to the longing for the land. Unlike in Christianity, when I led groups, and I'm very much looking forward to leading groups of churches back in the Holy Land, one of the things I really love about your faith is that when pastor calls on someone, would you like to pray for us? And that person can come up, and whatever is on their mind at that moment constitutes as a prayer. in Judaism? It's written text. There's no deviating, there's no straying. You can't add your own touch, so to say. And that is also when it comes to the blessing over the food. But there's another profound difference. And you know what that is? When do you bless the food? Before you eat, right? What do? We wait until the end. And what's the practical explanation? Exactly. We want to make sure it was worthy of blessing. But we also add a blessing that says, we offer thanks to you, Lord our God, for having given us a heritage to our ancestors, a precious, good, and spacious land, alluding, of course, to the land of Israel. And the ending accord of the Jewish connection to the land would be the Passover, the story of the Exodus, and the time that the children of Israel spent in the desert until they became a free people in the land is what's called the Haggadah. And we end it with the following verse. Next year in Jerusalem, the rebuilt. So the influence of our past on our present and our future is pretty apparent when it comes to the Jewish people. The second religion to appear on the stage of history are the Christians. What you see here is the birth grotto in Bethlehem with what's called the Bethlehem Star. Christianity has deep roots in Israel, in Jerusalem. It's the place where Jesus was born, where he lived, where he taught, where he basically founded the new religion, and of course where he died. We'll be covering things like, okay, the earlier Christians, Jesus included, were Jews. What was the title with which Jesus' disciples addressed him? What did they call him? Rabbi. And rabbi has acronyms. It could be Rosh Bet Israel, the head of the house of Israel, Rishon Bet Israel, the first of the house of Israel. In any event, it refers to somebody that's considered a source of authority, knows what he's talking about, and can be the go-to when you have questions about Judaism. And that is how Jesus' disciples perceived him. We'll briefly mention what has gone on with research, building monumental churches, and some thoughts about the future. So the four Gospels, they talk about the life of Jesus. I want to start talking about some of the events that perhaps, or two of the events, that mark a gradual drifting away. And the first one is in Acts 10, verses 9 to 16. And again, if you remember the context, Peter is busy, he's had a long day, and he gets back to his home base, which is the house of a man called Simon the Tanner. Today, it's Johnson, it's Smith, it's, whatever name it is. Back then, a lot of people were named after their profession. And the host was a guy called Simon the Tanner. As a guest of the household, Peter was not expected to be a part of the chores. And he was said, all right, you're hungry and tired, go up to the deck, take a little nap, and we'll call you when dinner is ready. Lo and behold, he accepts that invitation, and while he's asleep, he has this vision in which he's offered non-kosher food. And even though he's very hungry, in his dream, he rejects that. He refuses to eat until a voice says to him, again, second time, what God has cleansed, you must not call common. This was done 3 times, and the object was taken up into heaven again. From that point, ladies and gentlemen, Christians are no longer binded by the dietary laws of Judaism that prevent us, or those of us that observe, from eating all the good stuff. So, yeah. The second thing that was going on, when Jesus was around, the teachings of the new faith were maybe not even with the intentions of creating a new faith, but more bringing about some changes within the framework of Judaism. But then, as he awoke from that dream, he was told that there are people that are looking for him. And they identified themselves as messengers that were sent from Caesarea by a guy called Cornelius, who was a captain in the Italian regiment, who asked Peter to come back with them to talk to him in Caesarea. Peter accepts. Caesarea is in the axis of about 40 miles away from Jaffa, and they get there a day later. And when he goes into the house of Cornelius, he ends up talking to him. and baptizing him as the first pagan, if you may, the first Gentile that accepts Christianity. From that point onwards, it's a very important turning point. Christianity is open to whomever wants to embrace it, unlike the past when it was primarily directed at Jewish people. The Holy Land has known many of the stories of the New Testament to happen there, and what you will find happening over the last maybe 1700 years are efforts to commemorate the places of importance. Why only 1700 years ago? I mean, Jesus was around over 2,000 years ago. Well, from his death until roughly the 4th century, when Constantine comes along and sends his mother, St. Helen, to search for the traces of the holy sites, the whereabouts of these places are unknown. Oftentimes, you've got next-door neighbors, literally, telling their sons orally, this is the place where Jesus was crucified, and his next-door neighbor said, don't ever listen to Mr. Smith, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's over there. And Helen is the first one that has to come and put some law and order into that, and it's in her time that they build what we call the Byzantine churches. Those churches are primarily destroyed some 300 years later when the Muslims take over, rebuilt by the Crusaders, destroyed again by the Muslims, and rebuilt in modern times. And that kind of gives us a whole sense of we're really not able to say beyond any doubt which is the place. And then when I lead tours, I say to people, hey, look, it's not really that important if we know to pinpoint this is the exact spot where Jesus did this or did the other. It's the sense towards this is the land. And somewhere, for many, many centuries now, our ancestors have taken that this is where this awesome event happened. One of the really spectacular places and most beautiful, in my opinion, is the Mount of Beatitudes. It overlooks the Sea of Galilee. The architect here is a famous guy called Antonio Barlucci. He designed quite a few of the monumental churches in the latter part of the 19th century on until he was expelled. He was Italian, and back in the 40s when World War II was raging, it was found out that he was Italian. The British, they were on the wrong sides, and they deported him as a citizen of a country at war. But he made a major contribution, and Mount of Beatitudes is one of my favorite places that he designed. One of the most powerful sermons many pastors that I've led over the years have said to their groups, this is where we believe that the sermon of all sermons was delivered. And I definitely could go with that. So the Mount of Beatitudes. Over here we have a number of places. This is Capernaum, the remains of the synagogue in Capernaum, where Jesus was teaching. A lot of other incredible things happen in Capernaum, including the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. Over here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the mausoleum that's built there. This is in Jerusalem. And down here, a view from the Mount of Olives overlooking the cemetery and the valley that separates the slopes of the Mount of Olives from the old city, the Kidron Valley. Christianity has a strong belief in the two comings. The first coming, which is, of course, the birth of Jesus, and the second coming, which is supposed to follow. There's a lot of different prophecies. And as I said, I'm not your pastor, so I'm not going to touch onto that, but I will just mention one of them. So in Acts, we say, here we can see the verses that are relevant to the birth and the finding of the baby Jesus in the manger. Over here is the being taken up in Acts 1, verses 9 to 11. And when he had spoken these things, while they behold, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. The second coming, perhaps very appropriate prophecy in Zechariah 14, verses 1 to 4. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall divide into the midst of thee. And this feet shall stand in the day upon the Mount of Olives. It is believed that that is where the great rapture is going to happen. That's the second coming. So that's, in a nutshell, the Christian ties to this land. And the third religion, again, in the order that they appear on the stage of history, is Islam. The word Islam means submission, means the complete. They claim to be the ones that accepted the best of the previous two monotheistic religions. As a matter of fact, there are even of them that believe that Christianity and Judaism are actually just phases that are supposed to prepare the world for the supremacy, if you may, of Islam. The issue with Islam when it comes to this land, there's no mentioning of the land of Israel in the Quran. Neither is there any mentioning of Jerusalem. However, they do have their decent reasons to refer importance to Israel and Jerusalem. And that's based on something that I don't know if you're familiar with. It's called the Hadith. The Hadith is a book of oral traditions of the sayings and quotes from the Prophet Muhammad. We'll get to see what it looks like. This is the Dome of the Rock. The rock is what you see here, the interior of the Dome of the Rock. That, according to tradition, is where Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice, and where, in the Muslim tradition, Muhammad ascended from, riding on a creature that is semi-horse, semi-human, known as the Burak, receiving the Quran from Allah and determining the amount of prayers that Muslims pray 5 times a day. So here you can see a little bit about, the elaboration of what I was talking about, how they see themselves as a religion that has been there before, but it wasn't time to reveal it until Muhammad was ready to show up. And this, you can see, is today the 3rd most holiest place for them. I'll explain to you in a moment why. So the Quran, in their chapters in the Quran are called surot. In Surah 17 in verse 1, it reads, "Glory be to the one who took his servant Muhammad by night from the sacred mosque to the furthest mosque, whose surroundings we have blessed, so that we may show him some of our signs. Indeed, he alone is the all-hearing, all-seeing." Now, the furthest, or the sacred mosque, is Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And the furthest, and this is where it's commentary based on the Hadith, is Jerusalem. The compound on which the two mosques sit, and we go there when we're doing a Holy Land trip, is known in Arabic as Al-Aqsa. Anybody know some Arabic? So Al-Aqsa means the edge, the furthest spot. In his days, that would have been the furthest point away from Mecca that Muhammad reached, spreading the ideas of Islam. From after his death, they granted spread further on. This is the Hadith that I mentioned, the concentration, the gathering of all the quotes of Muhammad that are the basis for some of the traditions, including the interpretation in here. This is what he was alluding to when he spoke about the furthest place being Jerusalem, the sacred place being Mecca. For some reason, names are not explicitly mentioned, but that's the commentary that is found based on the Hadith. So far, we've covered a little bit about the importance of the place. We've explained about how Israel has the 3 L's going for it as an advantage. We explained about how the Jewish people arrived here as a result of a navigation problem by Moses. But we explained about the importance of Israel as a land bridge. And then, of course, later on, if we were to sort of say, okay, I say Israel, you say what? And you would say Jesus, you would say Jeremiah, you would say one of the prophets. And that's most probably what most people know. But I did want to make a point of showing you that its importance exceeds the monotheistic religions and precedes them in that sense that it's a land bridge. Today, Israel is founded in 1948 out of the ashes of the Holocaust. And we don't have a constitution in Israel. We have what's called basic laws that are maybe the foundations for a future constitution. And I want to give you a few basic laws, examples of basic laws, passed, of course, by our House of Representatives, which is called the Knesset, 120 people, legislators that sit here. One of the earliest decisions that Israel took when being formed is we will vouch for the well-being of Jews not only in Israel, but also elsewhere. And based on the lessons of the Holocaust, the reality that we encountered time and time again in Europe was that Jews could have been saved if wherever they tried to get to would let them in. But there were many times when that wasn't possible, and because of that, thousands of them perished. When Israel becomes a state, that is remembered, and a decision is put together to create a basic law that's called the law of return. And note the year that it's passed, 1950. 2 years into statehood, that law is passed. And basically what it says is that whoever is Jewish, and the criteria that defines you as Jews is equivalent, or at least was equivalent, to what the Nazis said. The Nazis called you a Jew if you were a quarter of a Jew, one of your grandparents. And in the early stages, when Israel became a state, that was the criteria used. Today, it really has to be the mother. The lineage in Judaism is passed down by the maternal parent, but back then it was one quarter. One grandparent, grandfather or grandmother was good enough to call you a Jew. And what you got as a Jew is the right to do something that's called making aliyah. So moving from Florida to South Carolina, or from Chicago to Baton Rouge, okay? Wherever, you call that moving around or relocating. When it comes to moving from outside of Israel to Israel, we call that making aliyah, which literally means, the word aliyah in Hebrew means to ascend. So you're not physically ascending, but you're spiritually ascending to a spiritual high, the land of Israel, and you're deciding to make your home in Israel. A person that does that and is Jewish can immediately obtain all rights. No waiting period, no green card period, immediately citizenship, with all the rights that derive from that, including the right to vote right then, right there. So that's one of the laws that were passed. Another one is called the law of Yad Vashem. Israel sees itself as responsible to see to it that the atrocities of the Holocaust are not forgotten. The name of the institution that is headquartered in Jerusalem is Yad Vashem. A yad in Hebrew literally means a hand, but symbolically it means a place, a center of remembrance. And in Isaiah, in chapter 56, verse 5, Isaiah, as the prophet of the Lord, is asked, so what's going to happen to the foreigner, to the converts, to the eunuchs, to all of those that were with us? And he comes back with a promise on behalf of the Lord. I will bestow upon them within my household both an honored place and an honored name, even better than the honor that comes from having children. I bestow upon them my everlasting favor. You will never be forgotten. And that is perhaps the prime objective as Yad Vashem as an organization, to commemorate. It's also involved in education and a lot of different aspects of that are related to the Holocaust. But the decision was it's going to be inspired by the Bible, and that starts with the name that is based in Isaiah. Interesting facts about Israel. Today, there's measurements of how many foreign reporters per capita. Israel has the third largest presence of foreign press. You want to try and guess which are the ones that have a higher presence of press? Well, Brussels, that is the headquarters of two pretty important organizations, NATO and the European Union. And then, of course, Washington, D.C. has the strongest presence. But, for a country which is about 1/445 of the United States in landmass, to be at number 3, that obviously says this place is interesting. It's worth covering, and reporters actually really want to be able to report from Israel, from Jerusalem. Over the years, many things have been said about Israel. I'm just going to flip through some interesting quotes. Mark Twain pays a visit here in the 1860s, and this illustration finds its way into the book he wrote about this journey. It's right next to Mount Tabor, which is, according to tradition, the site of the Transfiguration in Lower Galilee. And he speaks about the land in general terms as a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land. That's what it was in the 19th century, because nobody really cared for that land. Nobody had the passion and the drive to make something good out of it, as started to happen once the Zionist movement was born and Jews realized that this is the golden opportunity to return to our homeland. So much so that they were able to create so much change that these two gentlemen, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, this is what they have to say about Israel. Bill Gates, Israel by many measures, relative to its population, the country which has done the most to contribute to the technology revolution. And I love what Warren Buffett has to say. If you go to the Middle East looking for oil, you don't need to stop in Israel. But if you're looking for brain, for energy, for integrity, it's the only stop you need to make in the Middle East. So I think that says something right there. This is the cover of the New York Times from 2021. It mentions the most important inventions of the year. More than 13 of them came from Israel. How many of you use the navigation app Waze? Anybody know of it? Okay, so Waze comes from Israel. There's the Orocam, this little, okay, sorry, not here yet, coming now. This is Orocam. It's a pill that you swallow. It has a tiny little camera that allows physicians to look at your intestines and inside and make medical decisions. The flash drive came from Israel. We have 2 languages. There's something that the UN does annually that's called the Happiness Index. And amazingly enough, despite all the hardship that we've been going through over the last year and a half, in 2024, Israel was still ranked number 5th in its satisfaction of its people from life there. And when it comes to the ages under 30, second in the world. So that's a pretty neat accomplishment right there. This is the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point on Earth, some 1,300, just over 1,300 feet below sea level. The 4th most densely concentrated with salts and minerals in the water. It's an amazing experience. If you make it to Israel, you'll have a chance to go and float in the Dead Sea. And the last thing I want to mention, this is late Golda Meir. She was Israel's prime minister in the 1960s on to the post-October War in 1974. She was the 3rd woman in the world to lead a country. Okay, Israel was the 3rd country in the world that had a woman serve as its prime minister. In terms of the future, you know, this is not a challenge-free region. It's a pretty intense region. We have the external threats that have to do with the security and the attempts that have been made over the years to try and wipe us off the face of the map. We'll be talking about that in depth when we get into our next talk, the current events. We've got some issues from within, especially over disputes regarding some profound topics that the Israeli society is dealing with. Unfortunately, we still, and I hope this is going to change and I'll be able to scratch it off my next talks, the hostages situation, the equality and burden. There are certain parts of the Israeli society that are exempt from military service, and then, of course, the breach in trust between the state and citizens. But all that said, there's a lot of things to be proud of, and most Israelis are proud of their country, do feel a deep connection to it. And I think a very appropriate way to end would be with this quote from Isaiah 60, verses 1 to 3. Arise, shine, for the light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. And the Gentiles have come to thee light, and kings to the brightness of the rising. That is what we think will happen in the future. We will return to be a light upon the nations. That's the slogan, the teaching by which we live. And I want to say thank you for listening. And this is a group picture that was taken from the Mount of Olives overlooking the Temple Mount. And I really look forward to the day that we'll be able to greet you, welcome to the Holy Land, and take this group picture as a everlasting memory from your visit to a place that has an amazing past, present, and future. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you for listening. I really enjoyed talking to you here today. And at this point, I'll be more than happy to take some questions.
We got a couple microphones to go around. Questions before we get to, we're going to give a little bit of break in just a second, and then Reuven is going to share a little bit of the modern conflict that is happening right now and what is going on there. And so if anybody has a question, Pastor Jim has a mic in the back, and I've got a mic in the front. Any question? Remember, there are no dumb questions, just dumb people. So whatever you have, feel free, and we'll be more than happy. Anybody?
You all gone shy?
Yes, hold on.
Wait for the microphone.
Okay. The mosque is in Jerusalem.
Correct.
How in the world did you Jews let that come?
How much time do you have? Look, obviously we're not thrilled with that reality. I'll just say that to remove it, and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to elaborate any more than that, it's complicated. Okay? It got built because they were the sovereign rulers of the land. The Muslims were the sovereign rulers of the land, and they had the opportunity, and they built it, and then history has played its thing, and they've been able to keep it in place for just under 1,400 years now. So, yeah. I mean, look, there are those that say, the Lord wanted the first temple and it was built. The Lord wanted that temple to be destroyed and it was. Second temple was built, second temple was destroyed. It's all the will of the Lord. If the Lord wants the third temple and wants the destruction of this mosque, he'll show us the way. Okay?
Any other questions? Yes. The question is the mosque still being used?
Yes, the mosque is an active center of prayer. It actually ranks as number 3 in the world today in importance when it comes to mosques. The only other 2 that are any more importance are the birth and burial place of Muhammad in Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. Jerusalem is considered, the compound of the Al-Aqsa is considered the number 3 most important.
One more question in the back, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break.
I had the opportunity to visit Israel about 20 years ago.
40?
20?
20, okay, yeah.
Yeah, kind of not that old, but all right. But
I'm not implying anything.
but I was wondering, when we were there, a lot of the sites that people would most want to visit, for example, Bethlehem, were controlled by the Palestinian Authority. We were very fortunate that we did get to go up to the Temple Mount, but that was a last-minute approval. And I was wondering if you're still encountering difficulties like that when you are taking groups on tour.
Okay. So, by the way, the visit to Temple Mount is not something that is subject to the consent, of the Palestinian Authority. That's Israel's call. Whether or not to let you into the mosque, that is the Muslim Waqf, which is the religious council's decision. And as of now, they have this across-the-board decision that if you're not Muslim, you're not going into the mosque. You can get onto the premises, you can walk the grounds. The decision if to permit that or not permit that is Israel, because Israel has maintained the responsibility for the security arrangements. As for sites of interest in the West Bank, which would primarily be Bethlehem, so Israel and the Palestinian Authority do work pretty well together on seeing to it that those that want to go in there can do so. Obviously, right now it might be a little tricky, but I'm sure that everybody realizes on both sides that it's in the best interest of everybody to resume visitation into Bethlehem and to any other part of Israel for that matter, or the West Bank, the Palestinian sites, or Palestinian-controlled sites. So I think that by the time it will be okay for people to start visiting again, visitation to Bethlehem will be possible.
Before we take a break, one of the things that I love, and you saw a couple pictures of, you saw a picture with inside of the church that was a site that is said to be of Jesus' birth. And then you also saw a picture of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is one of the locations where they believe that Jesus was crucified. And in those sites, and Reuven, I love those pictures, it is very bright, and you are able to see that. I have been several times to Israel, and Reuven knows this over the years, up until probably about, I'd say, 10 years ago. Those sites, within them, the churches, with the oil lamps that were burning within, it created soot and dark black soot that covered the walls of those churches. So when you would walk in, I loved watching our groups because you'd have these wonderful Christians that are so excited, and then they walk in and they go, "Whoa, this is a fixer-upper." because it was just so dark and dreary. And here they are at where Jesus' birth was, and it's supposed to be bright and life-filling. And they walked in, and it was just doom and gloom, and it was special. It was amazing. But what was incredible about 10 years ago is when they started restoring those walls. And when you walk in now, to not only see the white walls, but to see, and they discovered amazing mosaics, gold leaf mosaics in the church that is over Christ's birth, which were fascinating. But the bottom line is what it told us that we're walking into. Isn't that what Jesus does to us as followers of Jesus? Is that even in our darkest moments, even when we're covered in so much soot, dark, and gloom, because of Him, we can be restored. And it's so beautiful and such a great place to be. And Reuven has led many of us into those sites, and we hope to get back soon. We're going to take about a 3-minute break, give a little bit of a restroom break or a little bit of break. We're going to come back with the modern day conflict. We'll be starting in about 3 minutes. That is of a different faith or culture, and that is not the case. In fact, many individuals, cultures, and races within Jerusalem, they coexist to one another. They share one another. They grow families with one another. They encourage one another, and they're just as upset as our Jewish friends about all that's going on. And so it's not necessarily everything that you see on the TV, and you're going to hear a little bit of Reuven with regards to what is currently happening. So with that being said, would you welcome again our friend Reuven?
Okay, we on? Never know with this technology if it's going to betray you. Usually I start talks with a little bit about myself, and I remember that I did not do that, so to say, in the previous talks. I'll just take 3 minutes to tell you a little bit more about myself, especially for those of you that have never met me over in the land. The first thing I'll do is a very Jewish thing, and that is, when people ask a question, I answer with a question of my own. So you're going to ask me, where are you from? Where's your accent from? And I'm going to say, where do you think it's from? All right, so I'll take 2 guesses. And those that know, please remain silent. See? Australia. I get that a lot, but the answer is no. Yes, sir. I get that a lot, and the answer is no, and now I'm going to give it away. It's the UK. I was 7 years old when my parents decided to make Aliyah. We explain what make Aliyah is in 1972. I remember that my 3 siblings and myself were each given a chance to ask questions about the ramifications. For the life of me, I don't remember what they asked, but I remember asking 2 questions that the answer to ended up being no. And they were, do they have color TV in Israel? Believe it or not, in the early 70s they didn't. And then the second one was, do they show Doctor Who in Israel? And that was also a no, and I announced I don't want to go. Little did it help me, democracy was not practiced in our household. And in 1972, as I like to put it, I was moved to Israel. But in hindsight, when I look back at it, I couldn't have thought of any better place that I would have liked to spend my life. I've done a lot and experienced a lot in Israel. I've lived in its 3 big cities through different circumstances, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. I've lived on the 2 main farm communities, Moshav, Kibbutz. I've spent a year doing volunteer work before the army. I've served with the Defense Forces. When I got done with that, I was offered to take suitability tests that will kind of try and help me zoom in on what I should do as a career. The occupational psychologist that interviewed me, after a few sessions, he summed it up for me and he said, look, it comes across that you're pretty good with numbers. You could make for a good CPA or a bookkeeper, but it strikes me that you would most probably enjoy being with people, being in the outdoors and history. So why don't you look into becoming a tour guide? And as you say, the rest is history. I've been doing that for the last 33 years now. As you know, right now there's a temporary pause, but it will come back. And so will you, and we'll meet again in the Holy Land. Amen? Okay, so current events. When I was putting these topics together, I had 2 insights that I want to share with you about this particular topic. Unlike the others, that they're pretty much all said and done. I mean, you can talk about them in the sense of we know the main things that are related to them. You can choose to include or disinclude different aspects, but they're done. The current events is something that is unfolding all the time. We'll see in a moment that we kind of defined it as what were the things that were happening in Israel and in the region in the last couple of years that led to the current situation. I'm going to stretch that a little bit and go a few years back in time, but we'll get to the time present very quickly. The other thing that dawned on me is that numbers are only as good as the days that they are announced. So, for example, the amount of missiles that were shot into Israel, how many people had to be evacuated from their homes, how many hostages are still in captivity. These things are very dynamic, and the reducing of the number of the hostages is a very encouraging sign. And then, of course, there are things that are happening that are of significance. As I had finished writing the main body of this presentation, a pretty significant episode happened that we don't quite know its ramifications, and that is the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. That's big. It's still a little too early to gauge where it's going to go, but by and large, for the time being, it's an important positive development. But that's the kind of thing that would happen in a region like the Middle East, where we constantly say, when visitors come, be it quiet, be it a little shaky, you've come at interesting times. I mean, there's never a dull moment, literally, in the land of Israel, if it's biblical or if it's current events. And today we're going to focus on current events. And the method that I've chosen to address this topic would be to give a little bit of background, to talk about some of the coinciding, parallel, at times intertwining inner and external processes, talk about some of the outstanding events, of course, where relevant, we'll throw in some Bible connections, and of course, as we just mentioned, last-minute developments, and some thoughts about what's next. The two axes, if you may, that I would like to address are what's going on in Israel and what's been happening out of Israel and how they come together and created the circumstances that climaxed with October 7th, 2023, and what has happened since then. So Israel was founded in 1948. We are a multi-party parliament. We're supposed to go to elections every 4 years. And I say that because I've put a chart here that shows the first elections were held in 49, 51. If you look, until 2015, even then we didn't necessarily manage with most governments to last the full 4 years that they were supposed to be in power. But what I want to draw your attention to is what happened since April of 2019. April 2019 elections, September of 2019, same year elections, March of 2020 elections, March of 21 elections, November of 22 elections. The government that was chosen then is still in power. One of the nice things about being here is that we kind of lose touch. But from the little that I've read, Israeli news outlets, I'm hearing that they may have some challenges, and who knows, they also might end their term earlier. You see here Mr. Netanyahu and his wife Sarah casting their vote in the polls on election day. And Mr. Netanyahu is of importance to what's going on because he first came to power in 1996, a young, promising leader, did a lot of good things for the country. But over the years, he has beaten the record of how many times or how long he served as prime minister, on and off. And with that comes some issues. We don't have a restriction of terms in Israel. That's one of the things that is strong on the discourse for the future changes. We have to restrict the amount of times that a person can be prime minister. If America can allow a president to serve 2 terms and out, I think Israel could embrace something similar. But the issue is this. For all sorts of reasons, Netanyahu finds himself facing criminal allegations, and the state attorney decides in November of 2019 to press charges. The charges have to do with fraud, bribery, and breach of trust. Netanyahu was the kind of person that doesn't want to accept that as, as any other person. You're being charged of something, you have to defend yourself. He, back in the day, did call on another prime minister that had a similar situation to resign and to focus on his legal defense. He chose to try and intimidate and weaken the judiciary power. What you'll see is this is May of 2020. COVID is its peak. Members of his cabinet with him as he's delivering a speech, bashing the judges and the legal system for, so he says, false allegations. And this is done just as he's about to go into the arraignment of the charges that he's going to have to deal with. This takes a lot of people to the streets, and you can see major demonstrations against Netanyahu. The important thing is this: all of this commotion and protest is perceived on the outside world as an opportunity that Israel is weak and is focused on arguments from within, and perhaps will be dropping its guard when it comes to external threats. Israel has chosen to embrace a policy of containment, which means that if there are some rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip, it's not worth, letting all hell break out loose and going out to an all-out showdown, because it's bad for the economy. So we can take it. And actually, we were able to tell ourselves stories as for how this is actually a sign of power and restraint, that we're not responding to every single rocket. This, as I said, is seen as a sign of weakness, and you do start to hear voices that are conniving and really wanting to get ready to fulfill a program that had been born a few years earlier by Hamas and Hezbollah, and we'll get to explain in a moment who they all are. But before we do that, a little step back in time. So the Muslim world of today is divided to two main, and now we're actually going to the external chain of events. The Muslim world is divided mainly into two groups: Shiites, that they are the members of the bloodline of Ali, who was both the son-in-law but also the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad. He married his daughter Fatima, and they claim, those that follow Ali, the Shiites, that they and their descendants are the only ones that are worthy of becoming the Imam, the senior religious authority within Islam, because they're bloodline to Muhammad. The Sunnah, which means the way, claim that you need to be loyal to the teachings of Muhammad, but you don't have to have bloodline to Muhammad to be eligible to become the Imam. And these two groups, ladies and gentlemen, they have been at each other's throats for as long as Islam exists. Ali is murdered by Sunnis. This is his burial place in Najaf, which is in Iraq of today. What we'll see now is this is primarily the Shiite world, headed by Iran, and this is the biggest Sunni country, which is Saudi Arabia. There are Sunnis in other parts of the Middle East, and there are Shiites also in Iraq and in Lebanon, and Iran has been involved since the revolution in Iran in 1979 in efforts to confront the Saudis over the domination of the Muslim world. They wanted, and they see the Saudis as their main adversary for that matter, but they also see Israel and the US as obstacles to their aspirations. Now, what we have here is Iran. In Israel, we refer to the Iranians as the head of the octopus, because an octopus sends out its arms, and you can see the Iranians do a similar thing. What is in the striped color code here is areas that they actually control practically. And these are proxies that are doing whatever the Iranians tell them to do. And the ones in orange, and that includes the Gaza Strip, which is right over here, they are a part of the world that we call the Iranian influence is destabilizing. They're not full-on proxies, but they are definitely, the Iranians have a destabilizing impact on them. Before the Iranian Revolution of 1979, Israel and Iran actually have a decent relationship. When the Shah is in control in Iran, he works a lot with Israel. There's an exchange of military technology. A pipeline of oil is laid between Iran and Israel, and a lot of Israelis relocated to Iran for business opportunities and for just a great life. You can still find Israelis that remember the good old days in Iran. In 1979, Khomeini comes back to Iran, and it doesn't take him more than 2 or 3 weeks, and he severs all ties with Israel. Literally within minutes, the last representatives of the diplomatic corps are able to get out. The regular flights between Tehran and Tel Aviv are stopped. El Al used to have a regular flight there, and of course that had to come to an end. The next move up in the intensity of the struggles between Iran and Israel are after the Iran-Iraq war in 1991. The victory is on the Iranian side, and at this point they kind of single out Israel as their last obstacle from dominating the Middle East. And therefore it's a quiet hostility, but it's becoming more and more vocal. At first, the Iranians opt to use a technique that is using proxies. Fast forward to April of 24, Israel eliminated one of the senior people of the Revolutionary Guard that was based in Damascus, and that no longer allowed the Iranians to respond through proxies, and they put to a test all of the diplomatic efforts that were being done or being made to create some kind of coalitions ready to confront and take on the Iranian act, or the Iranian-headed what's called acts of evil. It was your former President Bush, I believe, that coined that phrase, the acts of evil. And boy, are they evil. Look what their present leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, had to say back in 2015. He said there would be no such thing as Israel in 25 years. That is his wishful thinking. And it goes further. Let's look at this. On June 23rd, 2017, they unveil a countdown clock that from that moment is counting the days, the months, the years, the minutes until Israel ceases to exist. They predict January 1st of 2040. Israel has other plans, but that's what they would like to see happen. And the sheer fact that they go to the trouble of placing something like a countdown clock for something to look forward to, that is unprecedented. How does all of this impact the region? During his previous term as president, President Trump was behind a very blessed initiative of putting together what are called the Abraham Accords. He realized that there are more moderate countries in the Middle East, and if he could bring them to work together, they have a better chance at confronting the acts of evil. He was able to orchestrate several agreements to be signed in 2020, be it the United Arab Emirates and with Bahrain. Here you can see the signing of the accords. They are named Abraham because the forefathers of the Islamic nation and the Jewish nation is the same Abraham. Abraham, from two different mothers, had his son Isaac and his son Ishmael. Ishmael is perceived as the forefather of the Muslims, and Isaac is one of the fathers, the patriarchs of the Jewish people. So it was very becoming, as they're all children of Abraham, to call these accords the Abrahamic Accords. Even though, and for them, for the Iranians, this is a bitter blow because it adds to the strength of the Saudis and other of the countries that would be opposed them, and headed by Israel. And they really have made efforts to sabotage any further implementations or any further joining parties to the Abraham Accords. One of the things that we know that stood behind the motivation to carry out the attacks of October 7th was to get in the way of this. And that has to do with the person that was heading Hamas at the time, a man that we'll get to in a few moments, Yahya Sinwar. He's the one that really moved the Hamas as a organization to side with the Iranians and be a part of this act. And we'll see in a moment what the ramifications are. So you can see here, this is the Middle East, Israel, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. They are the ones that joined officially, signed, and actually applied normalization to the relations with Israel, which means they opened up embassies in Tel Aviv. But they weren't the first Arab countries to do that. The first, surprisingly enough, is Egypt back in 1979, followed by Jordan in 1994. Here you can see the UAE, I just showed you on the map, and Bahrain. Morocco also signed the Abraham Accords since then. Sudan signed the Accords, but has not yet quite translated that into normalizations in the form of opening an embassy of their own in Tel Aviv and having Israel open one in their capital, Khartoum. But hopefully that will happen in the near future. So all of this is kind of setting the grounds for what's going on in the Arab world. You've got the Shiites versus the Sunnis. The Sunnis are headed by Iran, and Iran is trying to destabilize the world so that they can maintain leadership in the Muslim world. And for that matter, their end game, and this is where I don't want you to be surprised. Yes, they openly say that they want to wipe Israel off the face of earth, but US is trailing not far behind in terms of their priority as how soon that should be taken care of, and the rest of anyone that's not Muslim. Okay? So it's a challenging situation. What I wanted to show you here is Israel, and the reason I'm doing this on a separate map is to show you this is the Gaza Strip. In a moment we'll see the larger map. We saw it earlier on in the previous presentation. What I want to show you is just how close Tel Aviv is. Tel Aviv is about, from the northmost point of the Gaza Strip, about 35 miles. What we know in hindsight is that if the October 7th attacks had had even a greater success level from their standpoint, they wanted to get to Tel Aviv. They didn't quite manage to do that, but they got further than they expected. What we see here is the Gaza Strip. So we're talking of something that is about 15 miles long. At its widest point, it's about 7 miles. All of this is the Gaza Strip, the Gaza City. Rafah is in the south. What is in yellow is what we call the Gaza envelope. This is a conglomerate of Israeli Jewish communities, most of them farm communities, moshavs, kibbutz. There's one town over here, Sderot. The definition of being a part of the envelope is if your community, as the crow flies, is no more than 3 miles away from the border with the Gaza Strip. So all that is marked here in yellow would be immediately across the way for the infiltrating terrorists of October 7th, 2023. This is Mr. Sinwar, or Sinwar. He served prison in an Israeli jail since the late 1980s. In 2006, his brother Muhammad was the head of a group that managed to kidnap an Israeli soldier by the name of Gilad Shalit. And he didn't budge, he didn't compromise. He listed a very long list of Palestinian terrorists that were serving time in Israeli prisons that he wanted out. And the only one that knew whatever happens, he's at the top of the list, is Yahya Sinwar, because his brother is holding on to the Israeli soldier. In 2011, the deal is struck. Over 1,000 terrorists are released. Sinwar has a hero welcoming back in Gaza, moves his way up the ranks in Hamas, and by 2017, he assumes position as the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. He then starts to promote the idea that they should be working more closely with the Iranians an issue that was a little more controversial when it comes to his predecessors that were not so keen about the Iranian influence over the Strip. I'm happy to say that this circle indicates that he's been annihilated. He was found and he was killed in a conflict or a clash with Israeli troops. And until this day, they've not really been able to nominate a replacement. Sinwar, while it was alive, was picked up as speaking in rhetoric that talks about the Day of Judgment. In Islam, the Day of Judgment is the day that non-Muslims will be annihilated. Islam will be the only religion left, and everybody will live the Muslim way of life. The picking up of this kind of discourse was as early as 2 years before the attack. But all the assessments of the Israeli intelligence said there's no way that they mean what they're talking about. And the Israeli intelligence, chose to believe, along with many other signs, that it's not for real and that it's just something to let off steam and to impress the Palestinian people by this drastic, very violent discourse. Now, of course, they were serious about this, and they figured that the Day of Judgment can be hastened by carrying attacks and killing as many of the infidel, or at least force converting them into Islam. And the October attacks was supposed to be a phase in that chain that would lead to the fulfillment of their goals. As one of the other things, the thing I mentioned earlier on, I'm not big on numbers in this particular talk, but you can't go without. There's maybe one or two other times that I will use numbers. Murdered and killed, and I want to distinguish. Civilians are murdered, soldiers are killed. On that day, between the civilians and the soldiers, close to 1,700 people were murdered and killed. Over 19,000 in all of the communities, the towns, and the soldiers, 19,000 were wounded. 143 people ended up having to leave their homes because it was too close to the border and to the attacks. And the starting numbers on that one day were 300,000 people called up to do reserve duty. 2 of them were my own private sons. So, it's a stage in Israel. You grow up raising your kids knowing that they'll have to serve in the army, and you figure, right, once they get through their mandatory period of 3 years, you're done worrying. But no, when they get called up to reserves, it's just as scary. One of the landmarks of the attack is the Nova Festival massacre. I want to point out, this was a song and dance festival that was planned in advance to take place in a campground very close to the Gaza Strip. All the necessary approvals were reached, and the festivities started on the Friday afternoon and were supposed to end by midday on Saturday. 6:30 in the morning, the attack starts. The decoy, so to say, is that thousands of rockets are raining into Israel, causing people to run and catch shelter, and then under the cover of the rockets, with pickup trucks and with motorcycles and on foot, thousands of terrorists breach the fence. Now, what we know in hindsight is that they will orchestrate sort of civil disorder along the fence, and as part of the containment policy embraced by Israel, we didn't do much to drive them away from the fence. And they were using the commotion to plant explosive devices and waiting for the right time. The right time was the morning of October 7th. The obstacle there is not an easy one to get through. But if you have explosive devices, you can do it. And they were able to breach the obstacle in more than 30 different locations. They also used gliders to come in. They used pickup trucks, motorcycles, and they started to travel the kibbutzim, this music festival. From this music festival alone, they took 40 people hostage. just under 400 people were murdered, many more wounded, and men and women were subject to gender-based violence. You can see here the equipment that was left behind when people were just fleeing to try and save their lives. Over here is what the place looks like today, when each and every one of the victims has a tree planted in their name, accompanied with the nation's flag. Over here are some of the people that, over time, everybody in Israel has learned to memorize their story. These are the overall statistics, as we said. 250 people taken hostage, 117 returned through deals. That's increased a little bit since then. And then 74 murdered out of these hostages, including this young man here. This is Hersh Goldin Paulin, holding dual citizenship, US and Israeli. He was a part of the music festival. When the atrocities happened, a lot of footage was being released of what was captured on the GoPro cameras used by the terrorists themselves. And his abduction to Gaza was filmed. You saw that he was injured. His left hand was amputated in an explosion before he was loaded on the back of a pickup truck and taken to Gaza. A few months later, a sign of life was given by Hamas of him, but tragically, I'll tell you in a moment what happened with him at a later point. This is Noah Argamani. She was kidnapped from the music festival. You can see her, she's being put on a motorcycle and driven into Gaza. She was one of the few that were lucky to be released through military means in June of last year. And she lived to see her mother, who was on her deathbed, with one last wish. She wanted to see her daughter. And thanks to the initiative and the boldness of the IDF, she was released, was able to see her mother before she died, and 3 weeks later her mother passed away. So speaking of, fate and meant to be or not meant to be. This is Shiri Bibas and her two beautiful red-headed babies, Ariel and Kfir. Ariel was 2 years old when kidnapped. Kfir was 8 months old. He would have been 2 by now. Their whereabouts and their condition is unknown. There's a very deep concern to their lives. Hamas has revealed to Israel what is the condition of all of those that are on the list, and they're on the list. I don't think it's been shared with the general public, but the families had been notified, but the thought in Israel is that tragically they are no longer alive. We'll wait to see in the next few days. Their fate is supposed to be revealed. Over here, this one. Over here you can see the orders of the terrorists infiltrating into the communities were to kill as many as you can, capture as many as you can alive to bring them in as hostages, and to just set the place ablaze. And you can see, this is one of the kibbutzim where they did that. The homes are going up in fire. This is the blood-stained pair of glasses of a member of a kibbutz that his home was broken into by the terrorists. He was murdered, and the blood just covered his glasses that was left as a mute reminder of the atrocities. Over here, again, another picture of Noah. Noah, 2 weeks ago almost, she was invited and called up to the stage during the inauguration of President Trump. So that was like a closure of a circle, pretty amazing. The terrorist on pickup trucks. This is Hirsch again. Can you see that his left hand is missing? This is a few months ago, they released a video of him speaking to his family and urging Prime Minister Netanyahu to strike a deal and to end their misery. Tragically, at the later stages of the war, Sinwar felt that the IDF is getting a lot closer to him. Hirsch was a member of 6 hostages, a group of 6 hostages that were the immediate human shield for Sinwar. His thought was that if the IDF knows that there are hostages there, they're not going to come after him. And at some point he felt that that might not be the case. Trying to leave with an entourage of 6 hostages is something by that point Israel had so many eyes in the sky that it would be picked up on. So he decided to make his escape more efficient. He doesn't need them, and he left orders to have them killed. They were found in a tunnel in Rafah at sub-nutrition condition. An adult is supposed to weigh something at least 150 pounds. They were weighing ridiculous weights of less than 100 pounds when they were found. It just comes to show how barbaric they were and how they treated them. This is a cemetery of cars. Most of it is from the Nova Festival. What the terrorists did is they worked very organized. They went to the main arteries of traffic, got themselves deployed there with rifles. Anyone that tried to make an escape was dead. Just to make sure that nobody's left, they went and shot at these cars to make sure that nobody is able to leave them alive. The following days, the Israeli police force gathered all these cars, more than 1,600 of them, to a special dispatch where they went through them. Usually the verdict was to take out of commission. They're not able to go back. They're in no conditions to be used again, with the exception of about 5 cars. All the others were so badly hurt, so badly pierced, that they just decided to shred them as metal. Or for the time being, actually, they're not shredding them, they're leaving them as a monument there. There's stories in all the different communities. In a moment, I'll tell you 2 stories about bravery and initiative in the towns of Netivot and Ofakim that I showed you as part of the furthest that the terrorists got to. But before that, I want to tell you about kibbutz Nir Oz, more or less the center of the Gaza Strip, overlooking it, 400 members. On that day, they are the symbol of one of the worst hit communities. Out of the 400 members, 100 were either murdered or taken hostage. A quarter of the population. And the IDF didn't get there until after it was all said and done. The terrorists had crossed back to Gaza. So we're going to hear, hopefully, the story being told by residents of Nir Oz about the atrocities of the day. Pay attention to the date that this clip was taken. It's an article on the Israeli news about 25 days later, sort of towards the end of October, early November. So let's see.
An idyllic community burned to ashes. This woman is visiting her family's house for the first time since the massacre of October 7th that turned southern Israeli communities along the Gaza border into enclaves of horror, where terrorists systematically broke into homes, searching for civilians to kill or kidnap, burning down houses with families inside when they failed, where survivors hid for 8.5 hours locked inside safe rooms waiting for rescue. By the time help arrived, all the terrorists had already made their way back over the border.
We are 400 people in this community. 100 people they took or murder. So once of 4, every 4th people is not with us today.
The devastation is apparent, as are the relics of the life that once was. Traces of the families, of the children, of the grandparents who once tended their gardens.
Everything was so sad, now it's gone, nothing. They burn our souls, they really burn our soul.
The kibbutz of Nir Oz was one of the hardest hit by the Hamas incursion into Israeli territory. Located under 2 miles from the border, residents have a clear view into the Gaza Strip. From this house, Hadassah's children fled from those who infiltrated their community.
Last message I got from them, 8:30 in the morning. He told me they jumped from the window and hide in the bush behind the house.
But with Hamas gunmen inside the kibbutz, there was nowhere to hide.
The last message I got from my son was, Mom, be careful, be quiet. I love you. That's what he told me. And my daughter, she said, Mom, 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 this is the last message. They've been terrified.
She hasn't heard from them since. 3 weeks of agony, she said.
So I just want to elaborate for a moment about Hadass. You may be wondering, so wait a minute, why wasn't she with her kids? So, like happens, she and her ex-husband were divorced, but they were on good terms. They stayed members of the kibbutz. And that particular weekend, it was his turn to have the kids. So they were at his home. They were kidnapped with him from his home, and she was given the heads up to prepare. They were kidnapped after they failed to hide from the terrorists. The two kids were released November of 23 in the first and only one up until now of the exchanges. And Erez, the son, was 12 years old. What he had coming in a year's time is a highlight in the life of a Jewish boy, and that is his bar mitzvah at 13. Their prayers and thoughts were that Ofer, the father, will be released and will be able to attend the bar mitzvah celebrations. Unfortunately, it did not happen. The celebrations were a very bittersweet nature, because on the one hand, yes, it is a very joyful moment in the life of a child, but with the father missing, that's a burden that they had to carry during the celebrations. The circumstances of this very horrific day led to stories that, I have no better explanation than the divine providence. In Ephesians 1:11, it says, "In him we are also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out everything incomparably with the purpose of his will." And in Proverbs 16:33 we read, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." Because you may ask, how can you explain that some people were saved and some people were not? Divine providence, circumstances that were controlled by the Lord. I want to tell you two quick stories. This is the tomb of Baba Sali. Baba Sali is Father Israel. This is Baba Sali. He was a Moroccan immigrant, a Jewish Moroccan immigrant rabbi. He came to Israel in the 1970s and had a reputation as being a healer, as being a communicator, as being somebody that they attributed him virtues of overcoming barrenness. And when he died in Netivot, his hometown, they built this mausoleum for him. When Hamas got to Netivot, they failed to get in. There are two explanations. One is like a rational, earthly explanation. The first response team was well prepared. But some of the terrorists that were assigned to do that and that were captured alive attested to the fact that when they saw the rabbi's tomb, they didn't know what to make of it. And they thought it might have something to do with Islam as well. They decided not to touch it. So you may say the hedge of divine providence was spread over the town of Netivot. Over here is Rachel Edry. She and her late husband David were residents of the town of Ofakim. She was at home on that terrible Shabbat, and as we said, 6:30 in the morning, the terrorists start shooting rockets, and under the cover, with pickup trucks and whatnot, they start to advance, taking advantage of all the commotion and confusion in Israel. By 9 o'clock in the morning, they reached Ofakim, and within a few minutes, they were able to barge in. 5 terrorists barged into the home of Rachel and David and took them hostage. Gunpoint, negotiating, demanding all sorts of things. The police was alerted and showed up there with a SWAT team. Among them was the son of David and Rachel, Evyatar. He was also a captain in the Israeli police force, but he was told he's not able to participate in any attempt to breach because he's too deeply emotionally involved in the situation. And what they would need from him is a detailed description of where there are rooms, where there is a closet. And from Rachel, they were really trying to find out how many terrorists there were. Rachel, nobody knows how she did it. She managed to maintain her cool and straight thinking. And one of the things she did, you can see over here, the way to a man's heart is through his. She fed them, and she was a good pastry chef. She cooked them meals, she gave them cookies, she made them coffee, but at the same time, she tried to communicate with the forces outside. Now, she knew that to yell out, they're five, would cost her life. So she tried something. She asked to go to the restroom, escorted by a terrorist, and while she was there, she said to the terrorist, when I get done here, I'll make you coffee. How many should I make? Hoping that the terrorist would say 5, but he didn't. And then she sort of did this. She lifted her hand, and as if to wipe her face, she signaled to the police outside. And that's the way they could learn that there's 5 terrorists in the house. 2 o'clock in the morning, they breached and successfully eliminated all the terrorists and released Rachel and David. Tragically, David was deeply traumatized from this day, and in February of 24, about 3 months later, he died of a heart problem. But, you know, it's one of those things that happen. Now, the following day, in the north, Hezbollah joins. Here we see, this is the Israel's border with Lebanon. What we learned in hindsight is that the Hezbollah in the north were preparing a similar attack using a network of underground tunnels and whatnot that would make October 7th in the south look like something mild. It was like an October 7th on steroids. Luckily, they weren't coordinated with Hamas, and Hamas decided to act without letting them know that they plan on doing it. They had agreed upon the fact that when they do it, they will not agree to stop fighting until the other front is left alone. So Hezbollah at least kept that part of the bargain, and for about 10 months was actively involved in harassing Israelis, causing us to evacuate 43 communities. All these that are marked here along the Lebanese border were evacuated. 61,000 were evacuated with the aid of the government, and several thousand more decided that even though they're not at that close, ridiculous distance of 3 miles to the border, they still are in harm's way, and they moved on their own initiative. As things moved on, we started to have success. This is Hassan Nasrallah, the many years head of Hezbollah, who was killed in the summer of 24. And one of the climaxes of the struggle against Hezbollah was the successful implementation of what we call the Night of the Pagers and the walkie-talkies. Over the course of 24 hours, Israel carried out a master plan of igniting explosives that were planted in walkie-talkies that one of the shell companies they had started were able to sell to Hezbollah. And at the designated moment, thousands of them exploded in the hands of Hezbollah militants. Just under 100 were killed from the explosions, but over 4,000 of them were wounded to an extent that they lost fingers, they lost ligaments, they lost their eyesight. They were unable to continue being an effective part of the fighting force. The carriers of the pagers were not innocent civilians. They were members of an organization that was part of an effort. Now, it's very nice to play fair, but you've got to have the other side play fair. And they were not playing fair. And yes, I know the words collateral damage are terrible, and I wish that there weren't any, but the numbers were minimum. And that is something that happens in war. War is not a pretty thing. So the turning for the better in the north is something that is marked with the successful carrying out of this and the finishing of Hassan Nasrallah and several other high-ranking officials and leaders of Hezbollah. So we got to a point where I believe that we are now hopefully going to see the fulfillment of Judges 5:31. So let all your enemies perish, Lord, but let those who love him be as the sun when it rises in its strength. Then the land had rest for 40 years. Unfortunately, the history of the Jewish people is of such that we go through cycles of rest and turmoil. 40 years is the length of time that is mentioned several times in the Bible as we've known calm and quiet years, I think in Israel, as a starter, anybody would buy that. And I want to end with an optimistic message as for the answer to the efforts to put us down spiritually with this title over here. We will dance again. The ability to live a normal life, enjoying a song and music festival will return to Israel. Thank you again for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be more than happy to take questions.